Hi, my name's Rob Hardy from Utilise, and this is a brief demonstration of a powerful feature within Sage Intacct called Smart Rules and Smart Events. So firstly, what are the difference between the two? Well, a smart rule is a condition to generate a message. So in other words, it will warn a user that something's wrong when they're entering something on a screen or a form, or it's to stop them performing a certain action. Whereas a smart event is something that has an action when a condition is met. So for example, when a new supplier is set up, it will send an email. So it's an event that occurs as a result of a condition. So some examples of these are, for a smart rule, ensuring that a field is filled in on a form. So perhaps a form needs to have a field that it can't be left blank, or it can't have a full stop in it. So you can put some conditions on that trigger an alert when something's missing. Or for example, it might be a validation, so a date has to be within a certain range. It can't be older than 30 days or more in the future than 30 days. Or it could be that when you're entering new customers or suppliers or on entities within Intacct, it makes you enter it either at the entity level or at the top level. And another example might be that when you're putting on an invoice for a project, it restricts the codes that you can use for the nominal code and dimensions, as an example. And some examples of smart events might be that, as I mentioned earlier, when you set up a new supplier, it will send an email to someone in the purchase ledger department to check that it's set up correctly. Or it might write some information to a log file when someone changes some bank details on a supplier. Or it might update other tables within Intacct when you're entering, for example, a sales order and you want it to update a record or a field on a customer record. And the final one is that you might be creating something within Intacct and you want it to send that information to an external website outside of Intacct. And some of these things use another part of Intacct, which is called the Sage API, which I won't go into today, but it's another very powerful part of Intacct. And the other thing I just want to mention briefly here, there's another part of Intacct called a smart link. And this is the ability to launch from a URL within Intacct an external application. So for example, on a customer record, you might have a reference to their location which fires up a map and shows you where they are on a map application, or it might fire up a page within your CRM system, or if it's a sales order that's gone via a courier, it might be a link that takes you to the tracking data for that courier information. So the main benefits of using smart rules and smart events are perhaps the ability to prevent the user keying errors, so it naturally saves time. There are no programming skills required to use these facilities. They're quite a simple wizard you go through to set up, so there's obviously no development cost in doing this type of thing. It can create automation that saves duplication of work, and it can send emails to people on certain conditions to save you having to manually come out of the application and send an email manually. So let's take a look at the actual software and give you a demonstration. Okay, so we're now over in Intacct, and the first thing you need to do is to make sure that Platform Services is switched on as one of the subscriptions, and that can be found under Applications, Company, Subscriptions. And if you scroll down, you'll find one here called Platform Services, which needs to be switched on, and the user needs the appropriate permissions to be able to create smart rules and smart events. I'm going to start off with smart rules. So if I go to Company Platform Services, you can see down here you've got the area where you can now create smart rules and smart events. So if I start off in smart rules, I'll show you a couple that have been set up already. So two examples here. The first one is a rule that suppliers must be created at the top level, so they can't be created at entity level. So if I go and edit that, and I'll show you how you set this up. So the first screen is asking which object this smart rule relates to. And if you click on the down arrow there, you can see all the objects that are available to set a smart rule up for. And these are all well documented, but on this particular example, it's to do with creating a supplier. So if I move on to the next screen, the second screen is the type of rule this is. And if you do the drop down, you've got two types of rule. You've got an error, which actually prevents you from doing something. And you've got a warning that will say to the user, are you sure you want to do this? And then you have to repeat the exercise, and the second time you do it, it will be accepted. But on this occasion, I want to do it as an error. And this is the command, which is all well documented. It may look a bit complicated. That is the condition. So in this particular one, it's basically saying the left, which is the first 4 characters of this field, must be root. In other words, where I am within the system, it's looking at, and it's saying, am I at the root, which is the top level? So if that's true, then it will allow me to create the supplier. If that rule isn't met, in other words, it's not equal to root, so it means I'm in one of the entities, it will cause an error. And then the next box is the error message you want the user to get when that condition is met. So it will say supplier must be created at the top level. If we move on to the next screen, and the final screen is that every rule you create has to be given a name to store it within the Intacct system. There can't be any spaces or odd characters like percents and full stops and dashes, but an underscore is permissible. So this is a general type of name you give it. So you give it the actual words of what it means, separate that by an underscore character, and then click done. One thing I forgot to point out to that, just go back to that last screen again, is that you've got a status here which is active or inactive. So if it's inactive, the rule will be in the system but it won't be enforced. So once it's set to active, as soon as I then click the done button, that is now ready to use. So just to check that one works okay, if we go to a entity and I go and try to create a supplier, accounts payable, create a supplier, add, give it a name, supplier name. When I click save, that will then pop up an error screen saying smart rule, supplier must be created was violated, supplier must be created at the top level. So if I go back and I change that to the top level and do the same thing again, go into accounts payable, suppliers, add a new one, do the same thing, supplier name, and click save. That's worked. That's a smart rule in action. The other smart rule I've set up is to enforce that a field is not left blank. So I've got a custom field that I've created on a supplier called DUNS number, which is the register of the type of businesses within the UK. So if I go into my smart rule for DUNS number is required and edit that rule, so this time it relates to a customer, and the rule is that the DUNS reference is equal to nothing. So the double quotes at the end there means it's left blank. So if that condition is true, then this rule will be executed, and it will come up with a message saying please enter the DUNS reference, and it can't be left blank. And that's an error message, so it will stop you doing it. And this error will apply to both add and set, which means when you're creating a new customer or when you're amending a customer, but it won't apply when you're deleting a customer. And again, the final screen is to give the rule a name and make it active. So let's just make sure that one works. If I go to the accounts receivable on this occasion, go to create a new customer, and there's the DUNS reference, and I'm going to leave it blank. So when I save it, that rule will be checked and it's saying smart rule was violated, please enter the DUNS reference. If I go back and I put a DUNS reference in there and then save it, now it will accept it. So that's a second example of a smart rule. The next thing we're going to look at is smart events. So I've got a couple of examples to show you here. One of them under smart events is going to be sending an email when a new supplier or vendor is created, and the other one is actually populating a field within a invoice when you enter an AP bill. So the first one, the vendor email, if I go and edit this rule and walk you through the steps to set it up. So again, like a smart rule, the first thing it asks you is which object does this smart event relate to. So in this case it's a supplier. The second screen asks you what type of event is it. So that's called an action. So in this case it's an email, but there are 4 different types of actions that can take place. You've got email, HTTP post, write to a log file, or an API call. So this one is going to be an email. And the second step is on what event does this occur on. So when it's a supplier, it can either be adding a new supplier, deleting a supplier, setting a supplier, which means amending a supplier, or approving or declining. So on this occasion it's just going to be when a new supplier is added that an email is going to be sent. The next screen is the actual details of the email that's going to be sent. So it's the email address of the person that receives this notification of a new supplier, the subject for the email, and this is a body that's going to appear in there. So it's automatically going to put the company name that's been created in, the vendor ID, and tell the person that the supplier has been created. But if you need to know what these field names are, because they're quite fussy about the syntax, if you come down into the body of this section and click on field lookup, that will give you all the field names that are on a supplier record. So if I pick one like do not pay, for example, and click OK, that shows you the syntax you require for that field. So you then just copy and paste that wherever you want it. On this occasion I'll take it out. And the final step, like a smart rule, is that you need to give it a name. So it's a name with no spaces and the word separated by an underscore, a description of that smart event, and once it's active, as soon as I click on done, that will be working in the system. So I'll click on done, and now I'll go and create a new supplier. So accounts payable, suppliers, add a new account and call it test supplier and save. That's now created the supplier, and it's also now sent an email across to my email box telling me utilise PLC Skyline, which is the company I was working in. Vendor number 2031 has been created, and it also attaches a PDF with the information created for that supplier. The other smart event I've got set up here is an example of automatically populating a field on an AP bill when it's created. So if I go and edit this rule, this is now asking which object it relates to. So it relates to loading an AP bill in the purchase ledger. The type of event is it's an API call, and this is going to happen both when you add or amend a supplier. And the condition in which it runs is when this description is left blank. So if you populate the field, it's going to leave it as it is. If you leave it blank, it's also automatically going to populate it with this API call, which is basically saying update the API bill, update the records that I've just been working on and saved, and then put the word demo in a field called description. So the syntax of this is available on a number of Intacct help websites, so it may look a little bit confusing, but anyone that's familiar with XML will be able to do this really easily. And the final step is to give it a name, as before with the other events and rules, and make it active. So I'm now going to create a new AP bill for the Massachusetts Department of Revenue. Put in a bill number and a reference, and I'm going to leave the description blank. Put in the terms, net 30, and the transaction currency, US dollars, and the base currency, US dollars. Transaction amount and the location, one of the USA customers, suppliers, and I'll now click post anew. That's now posted the bill, but if I now go back and look at these bills, so if I go into bills, that's the one I've just posted at the top. If I go and edit that now, you can see it's automatically populated the description with the word demo. If I had put something in that box, it would have retained what I'd keyed in, but it's put the word demo in there. So that's another example of a smart rule. The final thing I'm going to show you is a smart link. And a smart link is an ability to fire off an external website. In this particular example, it's going to be showing them a map of a customer's address. So under the platform services smart link clicks, if I go into here, I can see I've got one previously set up here which is just called map, and it's for a customer. If I edit this smart link, it first of all, like the smart rules and smart events, ask you what object it relates to. So this it relates to a customer, and then in here is a target. And because it's not showing the whole thing in here, what I've done is copy and pasted this into Notepad, and this is basically calling up a post to Google Maps, and it's passing it fields from Intacct. So it's passing it the address line 1, address the city, the state, and the zip code. And the condition is left blank, so it will always be available and always fire. And then you can specify the dimensions of the box that pops up and whether it's resizable, scrollable, etc. If I click on next, you now give it a label, which is the label that's going to appear as a link in the customer record, and the link ID is going to be called map. It's going to relate to the primary contact for the customer and tells you which tab it's going to appear on, and then make it active. So if I now go to the accounts receivable customer list and I go and view any of the customer records, you'll notice that when you scroll down, you've now got a link at the bottom of here saying click on the smart link for this map. And it's now going to pick up the address of the customer, city, state, and the zip code, but this could be a UK customer with a postcode. Click on that link and it automatically pops up a map of where the customer is. So that's an example of a smart link. And that concludes the demonstration on smart events, smart rules, and smart links. Thank you.